Hello there, I'm Sam from Inclusive Magic. If you've watched any of my other videos or had a Zoom call with me, you'll have noticed this poster behind me, and you might have been wondering what it is. It's for a screenplay I wrote called COOLIE Crusade. What's a coolie? Isn't that word offensive? Or isn't that something to do with raspberries? Coolies were Indians and Chinese who travelled to British colonies and the Americas as indentured labourers, particularly to work on sugar plantations after the end of slavery. Is the word offensive? That depends. Oh yeah, and coolie is also a fruit puree, but that's not what this video is about. It's about the story of coolies, in particular Indian coolies in the British Empire. Between 1834 and 1920, over 1 million Indians went to other British colonies from the Caribbean and Guyana to South Africa, Mauritius and Fiji under contracts of indenture. These contracts required them to work terms of as much as 5 years on sugar plantations. This indenture system came about after slavery was abolished in the empire in 1833 and plantation owners needed labour. There are two ways to look at this. One way to look at it is it's progress. You know, the scourge of slavery has been outlawed and replaced by something based on freedom of contract. You know, you travel to a land of opportunity and you're paid to work. The other way to look at it is it still kind of resembled slavery. Desperate, famine-stricken Indians were snared by a recruitment process that bore some hallmarks of trafficking. They found themselves in terrible working conditions, and this freedom of contract was backed by the criminal law and violence. But while there's a lot of oppression in this story, there's also resilience, a pioneering spirit as coolies remade the old Indian social order, and a lasting cultural heritage and spirit that descendants of coolies call coolitude. So in the 19th century, sugar was the lifeblood of the empire. But without slaves to plant and cut this cane, a vital part of the imperial economy was threatened. So, the indenture system was created. It was state-sponsored and overseen by the Colonial Office. India offered a huge potential labour pool. Recruitment was farmed out to local agents. They painted this idyllic picture of a journey to a land of opportunity and prosperity. Far from preparing people for the grueling work that they were signing up for, they made a lot of Indians believe they were getting desk jobs. In a mad rush to recruit, people were signed up who simply weren't fit enough to do this kind of work. But despite all the chicanery and deception, for a lot of Indians it was still a lifeline. The country had been ravaged by constant famine, so guaranteed work, accommodation, rations, those were pretty appealing. For a lot of women especially, who either by being widowed or discarded by their husbands had been written off by Indian society, it was a chance to reinvent themselves and take control of their destinies. So recruits would be given a copy of the agreement which sets out the terms of their indenture. 3 to 5 years, cultivation work 9 hours a day, 6 days a week, in return for modest pay, accommodation and rations which would be deducted. Many of these folks couldn't read or write, so they'd sign with a thumbprint. After being held in crowded depots, they set sail on wooden clippers to colonies that included Guyana, Trinidad, Jamaica and Belize in the Americas, South Africa and Mauritius, and further east, Fiji. The journey by sea could take between 1 and 3 months. Accounts of these journeys vary. Coolies were fed, but sometimes water was scarce. They were crammed in together. India's long had a social hierarchy, the caste system, but that started to blur on these boats because people were forced to eat and sleep in the same space. Women had to fend off the advances of booze-emboldened crewmen. All coolies had to fend off disease. Lots of people died on these ships, which is why the treacherous voyage was dubbed the Kala Pani, black water. When these gaunt, bedraggled people finally stepped onto land, their sighs of relief probably didn't last long. Because yes, while they'd signed up for hard work and long hours, the back-breaking character of that work came as a shock to some. And the true conditions of the work only revealed themselves once they started. Just a moment. These people were being paid, were they not? So what's the complaint? Well, actually, sometimes they wouldn't be paid. Plantation owners would move the goalposts. You know, if coolies were meant to be paid a certain amount each day, owners would just redefine a day to mean a task that takes many days, and that way they could delay or even avoid paying and prolong the indenture. Coolies couldn't just leave and find other work. It was a crime for anybody else to hire them, and it was a crime to leave the plantation unless you had a pass. You could only get one of these passes if you were going to report a concern to immigration, but seeing as the person that you had to ask for a pass was the person that you were going to report about, i.e. the plantation owner, that didn't go so well. If you abandoned your post,
they put you in jail.
If you didn't do your work so well,
also jail.
Basically, you either had to be working, in hospital, or in
jail.
It's all very well saying, hey, freedom of contract, we're going to do some great work together, but if you don't hold up your end, I'm going to unleash the full might of the criminal justice system against you. I mean, call a machete, it's still basically slavery. Testament to that are the widespread instances of violence. Plantation owners beat and lashed coolies, mostly with impunity. Coolies also fought back. One of the horrors of this period was rampant violence against women. Gaiutra Bahadur talks about that in her excellent book, Coolie Woman. Amid all this intense fire, something was being forged, a new social order and community. The old caste hierarchies couldn't be enforced anymore. High caste Indians' privilege didn't exempt them from manual labour, and they were having to eat and lodge with people to whom they wouldn't have given the time of day in India. So those boundaries started to break down, as did religious differences. Coolies married across caste and religion. People started defining themselves not by the rules of the homeland, but by new ways that they were doing things here. As Walton Look-Lai says, coolies weren't simply victims. They tried to make their humanity manifest in a world that denied it. When their terms of indenture were done, lots of Indians went home, but many didn't, because this had become home. There are strong Indian diaspora communities in former sugar colonies. Descendants of coolies put forward the concept of coolitude, mostly through poetry, to capture the spirit of their ancestors, pioneers who braved the sea against the odds, toiled, and turned it into a life. Alright, is the word coolie offensive? I think it depends. The word is said to come from one or more Indian languages and means day labourer or wages. Porters in stations were and still are referred to as coolies. To the extent that it's used neutrally as a descriptor to mean labourer or porter, I don't think it's offensive. But there are two ways that it can become offensive. The first is where you use it in an insulting or demeaning way by tapping into the disempowerment of being a coolie.
Better to live like a coolie than die like a hero.
It's akin to calling somebody a mere peon or a lowly serf. Personally, I don't think it's that clever or funny to call somebody an indentured labourer. You know, coolies, peons, serfs have nothing to be ashamed of. Social inequality and feudalism are not their fault. So, you know. The second might be if you use it racially. Many Indians in the Caribbean still find themselves being called coolies. It's insulting because I'm saying, simply because of your ethnicity, I'm going to define you by this occupation, and I'm also going to imply that you're still an immigrant, whether you were born here or not. But I think it's one of those terms that's been reclaimed. Coolies were a major part of the British Empire, but many of us know nothing about them. As more gets written about them, particularly by their descendants, it seems to me the term coolie carries a sense of pride. My screenplay, Coolie Crusade, tells an epic story about coolies full of adventure, overcoming oppression, and finding family and community. If you want to learn more about coolies, check out the sources that I've cited below. If you have a story or a connection to coolies, I'd love to hear about it. If you've enjoyed this video, please hit like and subscribe. Until next time, stay safe and keep sharing your magic.